The mud on the loading dock wasn't just dirt. It was a mixture of diesel, red Georgia clay, and the runoff from the washing stations where the tanks were scrubbed down. It stained everything. If it got on your boots, you scrubbed for an hour. If it got on your skin, you smelled like sulfur for 2 days. Elouan Basson stood under the corrugated metal overhang, the rain hammering a rhythm against the roof that sounded like distant applause. He checked his watch. 14 hours. Right on time. He adjusted his left shoulder, hiking it up toward his ear. It was a habit, a tic he had developed 3 years ago after a hard landing during a training jump. His body was asymmetrical now, pulled tight on the left side, as if he were constantly flinching away from a blow that had already landed. He looked down at the clipboard in his hand. The manifest was simple: 4 crates of hydraulic fluid, 2 crates of MREs, 1 crate of optics. He just needed a signature. He looked up. 10 yards away, out in the open, out where the roof offered no protection, stood Private Kofi Mensah. Mensah was new. He had hands that looked too big for his wrists, heavy and cumbersome, hanging at his sides like lead weights. He was standing at attention. The rain was soaking through his fatigues, turning the fabric almost black against his skin. Facing him was Major Van Hala. The Major was dry. He stood just inside the lip of the overhang, his boots pristine. Van Hala was a small man, pale, with ears that were almost translucent in the gray light. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that sat crooked on his face because one ear was slightly lower than the other. He didn't look dangerous. He looked like an accountant who had gotten lost on the way to a tax audit. But Elouan knew better. Everyone on the base knew better. Elouan should have stepped forward. He was a warrant officer. He had rank. He had authority. He had the clipboard, but he stayed back, pressing his spine against the cold concrete wall of the supply shed. He told himself he was just waiting for the conversation to end. He told himself it was chain of command. He told himself it wasn't his business. "Your boots," Van Hala said. His voice was quiet. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't the screaming of a drill instructor trying to break a recruit. It was soft, dry, and sounded like shuffling paper. "Sir?" Mensah asked. Mensah's voice cracked. There was a gap between his front teeth, a dark space that made a whistling sound when he breathed too hard. He was breathing hard now. "Your boots, Private," Van Hala repeated. "They are compromised." Mensah looked down. His boots were submerged in 2 inches of the red, oily slush. "I am standing in the loading zone, sir," Mensah said. "It is muddy." "Excuses," Van Hala said. The Major coughed. It was a dry, hacking sound, but nothing came up. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his mouth, and folded it into a perfect square. "A soldier does not make excuses for his uniform," Van Hala said. "A soldier maintains standards, regardless of the environment." "Yes, sir," Mensah said. "Clean them," Van Hala said. Mensah blinked. Rainwater dripped from his eyelashes. "Clean them," Van Hala said again. "Now. Before you enter my facility, I will not have you tracking filth into my inventory." Elouan felt his stomach tighten. He gripped the clipboard so hard the plastic bent. There was nothing to clean the boots with. No rag, no brush, no hose. Just the rain and the concrete. Mensah looked around. He looked toward the shed. He saw Elouan. Their eyes met. Elouan saw the panic in the boy's face. It wasn't fear of punishment. It was confusion. It was the look of someone realizing that the rules they had been taught did not apply here. Elouan looked away. He looked at the rivets on the side of the transport truck. He started counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. He focused on the rust around the 3rd rivet. He focused on anything but the boy's eyes. "I am waiting," Van Hala said. Mensah knelt. He sank into the red slush. The mud soaked instantly into the knees of his trousers. He took off his patrol cap and held it in one hand, unsure what to do. "Use your hands," Van Hala suggested gently. "If you do not have the foresight to bring a kit, you must use the tools God gave you." Mensah hesitated. Then, he reached down. He cupped the oily water from a puddle on the concrete. He began to rub the mud off his boots with his bare hands. It was futile. He was washing mud with mud. He was rubbing grit and diesel fuel into the leather. "Harder," Van Hala said. "You are not caressing a lover, Private. You are maintaining government property." Elouan felt a burning sensation on his left cheek, right where the deep acne scars from his youth pitted his skin. He rubbed the spot. It felt hot. He knew this was wrong. It wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't corrective training. It was theater. It was a performance designed for an audience of one. And Elouan was the audience. Valhalla knew he was there. Valhalla was doing this because he was there, to see if he would stop it, to see if Elouan Basson, the man with the perfect service record, the man who followed every regulation to the letter, would break protocol to save a private he didn't know. Elouan didn't move. He stayed in the shadows. He watched Mensah scrub. The boy's hands were black with grease now. He was shivering. The rain was cold, a bone-chilling 40 degrees that seeped into the marrow. They are still dirty, Valhalla observed. Perhaps the laces. Mensah's fingers fumbled with the wet knots. He undid the laces. He pulled them out, dragging them through the slush. Clean the laces, Valhalla said. Mensah held the muddy laces in his giant, trembling hands. He looked up at Valhalla. Sir, please, he whispered. Please what? Valhalla asked. I cannot get them clean with mud, sir. Valhalla Seahill. He looked disappointed. He looked like a teacher whose student had failed a simple test. Then perhaps you should use your undershirt, Valhalla said. Elouan stopped breathing. That was a violation. Ordering a soldier to strip in the rain in a non-tactical environment for a uniform correction, that was actionable. That was something the Inspector General would burn a career over. If there was a witness, if there was a report, my undershirt, sir? Mensah asked. The white one, Valhalla said. It is cotton, absorbent, use it. Mensah stood up slowly. He unbuttoned his blouse. His fingers were slippery with oil, making the buttons difficult. He shucked the heavy camo jacket and let it drop into the mud because there was nowhere else to put it. He stood in his tan t-shirt. The t-shirt? Valhalla clarified. Mensah pulled the t-shirt over his head. His skin was dark, smooth, and shivering violently. On the back of his neck, Elouan saw a patch of vitiligo, a jagged map of pale skin that looked like a cloud. Mensah balled up the t-shirt. He knelt again. He began to scrub his boots with his own clothes. The white cotton turned brown, then black. Elouan felt the bile rise in his throat. He wanted to shout. He wanted to walk out there and say, "That's enough, Major. I'm taking this soldier inside." He imagined doing it. He imagined the feeling of righteousness. He imagined the relief on Mensah's face. But then he imagined Valhalla's eyes behind those crooked glasses. He imagined the paperwork. He imagined the review board. He imagined the promotion he was up for next month. The promotion that would secure his pension. The promotion he needed to pay for his mother's care facility. He did the math. The math was cold. The math said, one private's bad afternoon is not worth 20 years of service. The math said, stay quiet. So Elouan Basson stayed quiet. He watched until Mensah had ruined his shirt. He watched until Valhalla seemed satisfied, or perhaps just bored. Adequate, Valhalla said. Put your uniform back on. You look ridiculous. Mensah scrambled to dress. He pulled the wet, muddy jacket over his bare, freezing chest. He shoved his feet into the wet boots. He stood at attention, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. Valhalla turned. He looked directly at Elouan. He didn't smile. He just nodded. A small, acknowledging nod. We understand each other, the nod said. We know how the world works. Valhalla walked past Elouan, heading into the office. Bring the manifest, Mr. Basson, Valhalla said as he passed. Let's get you signed out. Elouan waited a beat. He looked at Mensah. The boy was staring at the ground. He looked broken. Not physically, but something inside him had snapped. The belief that the uniform protected him was gone. The belief that rank meant honor was gone. Elouan walked out into the rain. He walked past Mensah. He didn't stop. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He walked to the office door. He wiped his feet on the mat. He went inside to get his signature. He left the boy in the rain. And that was the moment everything changed. Not because of what happened, but because Elouan had decided, in that silence, that it was acceptable. The office smelled of lemon pledge and stale coffee. It was a violent transition. One moment, the world was cold rain and the smell of raw diesel. The next, it was dry heat and the hum of a laser printer. Major Van Hala sat behind his desk. He did not look like a man who had just forced a human being to strip in the mud. He looked like a man preparing to file his taxes. He picked up a pen. It was a silver Parker Yachter. He clicked it. Click. The sound was loud in the small room. Van Hala signed the manifest Elouan had placed on the desk. His signature was small, tight, and illegible. It looked like a piece of barbed wire snagged on the paper. "The hydraulic fluid?" Van Hala said, not looking up. "Is it the synthetic blend?" Elouan blinked. His ears were still ringing from the silence outside. "Yes, sir," Elouan said. "Synthetic, 46 grade." "Good," Van Hala said. "The mineral oil gums up the seals in this humidity." He handed the clipboard back. He didn't mention the boy. He didn't mention the boots. He didn't mention the white t-shirt turning black with sludge. It was as if it hadn't happened, or worse. It was as if it happened so often it wasn't worth a footnote in the conversation. Elouan took the clipboard. His fingers brushed Van Hala's hand. Van Hala's skin was dry and cool. "Anything else, Mr. Basson?" Van Hala asked. Elouan stood there. The image of Mensa's shivering back was burned into his retinas. He could say it now. "Sir, that was excessive. Sir, I'm filing a report." The words were there, sitting on his tongue like a copper penny. But then he looked at the wall behind Van Hala. There were photos. Van Hala shaking hands with a general. Van Hala receiving a commendation. Van Hala standing with his family at a barbecue. The system was solid. The system was a wall of concrete, and Elouan was just a man with a clipboard. "No, sir," Elouan said. "Nothing else. Drive safe," Van Hala said. "The roads are slick." Elouan walked out. He passed the loading dock. Mensa was gone. The only proof he had ever been there was a disturbed patch of red mud and a faint smear of oil on the concrete. The rain washed it away as Elouan watched. By the time he reached his truck, the concrete was clean. Elouan drove back to the motor pool. He followed the speed limit. He used his turn signals. He parked in his assigned spot. He walked to the mess hall for dinner. It was chili mac night. The smell of cumin and overcooked pasta hung heavy in the air. The chow hall was loud. Soldiers were laughing, clattering trays, complaining about the rain. It was normal. Terrifyingly normal. Elouan got in line. He took a tray. He took a plastic fork. He didn't look at the servers. He found a table in the back, near the trash cans. He liked the back. You could see the whole room, but no one looked at you. He sat down. "Seat taken?" Elouan looked up. It was Sergeant Joris. Joris was a supply sergeant from the aviation battalion. He was a giant of a man, standing 6'5", but he carried himself curled inward, his shoulders hunched up around his ears like a vulture trying to hide its neck. He had a condition that made his beard grow in patchy clumps, leaving islands of smooth, pale skin amidst the wiry hair. It made him look mange-ridden, unkempt even when he was freshly shaved. He was chewing on a plastic stirrer. He always chewed on something. "Sit," Elouan said. Joris slid his tray onto the table. He sat down, his knees hitting the underside of the table with a thud. "Hear about the new guy?" Joris asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He shoveled a forkful of chili into his mouth. "Which new guy?" Elouan asked. He knew. He felt the cold knot in his stomach tighten. "The kid over at Van Hala's shop?" Joris said. "Mensa, big guy. Looks like he swallowed a brick." "What about him?" "Got caught out of uniform," Joris said. "Showed up to a detail looking like a bag of smashed assholes. Mud all over his boots. Shirt hanging out." Elouan stopped chewing. "Is that what you heard?" Elouan asked. "That's what the blotter says," Joris said. "Van Hala had to smoke him. Right there on the dock. Had him scrubbing the floor with his own shirt just to teach him a lesson about hygiene." Joris laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a casual laugh. The kind of laugh you give when someone trips over a curb. "Kids gotta learn," Joris said. "You let standards slip. Next thing you know, birds are falling out of the sky because someone didn't torque a nut. It's all connected." Elouan looked at his food. The chili had formed a skin on top. "He made him use his undershirt," Elouan said quietly. It was raining. "So?" Joris shrugged. "Rain washes off. Stupid sticks forever." Joris pointed his fork at Elouan. "You were there, weren't you? Someone said they saw your truck." Elouan froze. This was the test. This was the moment of normalization. If he denied it, he was a liar. If he defended the boy, he was an outsider. If he agreed, he was part of it. Yeah, Elouan said. I was there. So? Joris asked. Was he a soup sandwich? The kid? Elouan looked at Joris's patchy beard. He looked at the plastic stirrer being mangled between Joris's teeth. He needed a correction, Elouan said. The words tasted like ash. See? Joris nodded, satisfied. System works. Joris went back to eating. Elouan took a bite of his chili. He swallowed it. It stayed down. That was the horror of it. The body accepted the food. The world kept turning. The conversation moved on to football scores and the rumor about the base closing early for the holiday. Halfway through the meal, a clerk walked up to the table. It was Specialist Xian. Xian was small, wiry, with a nervous energy that made him vibrate like a plucked guitar string. He had a distinct burn scar that ran from his right wrist up to his elbow, the skin shiny and hairless, a souvenir from a childhood accident with a radiator. He tapped his fingers against his thigh constantly. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. Basson? Xian asked. Yeah. Paperwork from the warehouse, Xian said. Major Van Hala said you forgot to sign the receipt for the pallet exchange. Xian held out a clipboard. It wasn't the manifest. It was a damage report. Elouan looked at the paper. To form 4,833. Report of damaged government property. Item, boots, combat, hot weather. Item, undershirt, cotton, tan. Damage, irreparable staining due to operator negligence. Cost to soldier, $145. Elouan read the narrative block. Soldier failed to maintain uniform standards in a hazardous environment. Soldier voluntarily utilized uniform items for cleaning purposes despite verbal counseling. Voluntarily, Elouan whispered. Sir? Xian asked. Tap, tap, tap. It says voluntarily utilized, Elouan said. Standard language, Chief, Xian said. Van Hala said you witnessed the destruction of property. He needs a corroborating signature so they can dock the kid's pay. Xian held out a pen. A cheap, black stick pen. Elouan looked at the pen. Then he looked at Joris, who was watching him with mild interest. If he didn't sign, Van Hala would call. Van Hala would ask why Elouan was contradicting a field-grade officer's report. Van Hala would ask if Elouan was calling him a liar. And Elouan was up for promotion in 3 weeks. Chief Warrant Officer 3. A pay bump of $600 a month. $600 paid for the private nurse for his mother. $600 kept her out of the state home, where the hallways smelled like urine. Mensa was just a private. Privates got their pay docked all the time. It was a lesson. A harsh one, but a lesson. Elouan took the pen. He didn't look at the text again. He found the line marked witness. He signed his name, Elouan Basson. The ink was black. It dried instantly. Thanks, Chief, Xian said. He took the clipboard. Have a good night. Xian walked away, his fingers tapping against the plastic backing of the clipboard. Tap, tap, tap. What was that? Joris asked. Admin, Elouan said. Paperwork never ends, huh? No, Elouan said. It never ends. Elouan pushed his tray away. He wasn't hungry anymore. He felt a heaviness in his chest, a dull pressure behind his sternum. He told himself it was the chili. He told himself it was the humidity. He stood up. I'm gonna turn in, Elouan said. Take it easy, Chief, Joris said. Elouan walked out of the mess hall. The rain had stopped. The air was still thick, but the sky was clearing. He looked up at the moon. It was bright, indifferent, and beautiful. He thought about Mensa. He wondered if the boy had new boots. He wondered if the boy was sleeping. He wondered if the boy knew that Elouan had just signed a paper saying it was all his own fault. Elouan got into his truck. He turned the key. The radio came on. It was a pop song, upbeat, happy. Elouan turned it up. He turned it up until the bass rattled the dashboard. He turned it up until he couldn't hear his own thoughts. He drove to his quarters, the music blasting, drowning out the silence of the loading dock. He had survived the day. The system had protected him. All he had to do was agree. All he had to do was nothing. 2 weeks later, the rain was gone. In its place came the heat, a suffocating, wet blanket of Georgia humidity that turned the air into soup. The bass slowed down. Movement became expensive. Every step cost sweat. Elouan Bassin walked the perimeter of the motor pool, checking the fence line. It was 9, and the asphalt was already soft enough to hold a boot print. He walked with his lopsided gait, his left shoulder hiked up, his body guarding against a phantom impact. He was looking for holes, breaches in the wire, but mostly, he was looking for a reason to stay out of the office. His promotion packet was on the battalion commander's desk. Chief Warrant Officer 3. It was effectively done. Major Van Hala had put in a good word. He had called Elouan reliable. He had called him a man who understands the nuance of command. Elouan stopped at the corner of the lot. He looked through the chain-link fence toward the supply warehouse. The bay doors were open. Inside, the shadows looked cool and deep. He saw a forklift moving pallets. The driver was Private Mensah. Mensah was different now. The change wasn't in his uniform. His uniform was immaculate. Boots polished to a glass shine. Trousers bloused perfectly. The change was in the way he moved. 2 weeks ago, Mensah had moved with a loose, heavy grace, like a young dog that hadn't quite grown into its paws. Now, he moved like a piston. Jerky, precise, mechanical. He didn't look left or right. He didn't speak to the other soldiers loading the trucks. He simply drove, lifted, reversed, and lowered. Elouan watched him for 5 minutes. Mensah didn't blink. He didn't wipe the sweat from his forehead. He just worked. He had become the perfect soldier, and he looked absolutely dead. He's a machine, isn't he? Elouan startled. He turned to see Corporal Sio standing behind him. Sio was the unit armorer. She was 25 years old, but her hair was entirely, shockingly silver, pulled back into a tight bun that pulled the skin of her face taut. She had a habit of chewing on the inside of her cheek, making her jaw muscle bulge rhythmically. She stood on the balls of her feet, always, as if she were trying to sneak up on the ground itself. "Corporal," Elouan said. "Van Hala fixed him," Sio said. She wasn't looking at Elouan. She was watching Mensah. "Fixed him?" Elouan asked. "He was sloppy," Sio said. "No discipline. You saw him that day, with the mud." Elouan felt a prickle of heat on his neck that had nothing to do with the sun. "You heard about that?" "Everybody heard about that," Sio said. Van Hala used it as a case study in the NCO development meeting this morning. Elouan went still. "He talked about it?" "He didn't just talk about it, Chief," Sio said. "He had slides." She chewed her cheek. "Bulge, relax, bulge, relax." "He showed the damage report," she continued. "The one you signed. He said it was a perfect example of administrative accountability. He said most officers would have let it slide. But you held the line." Elouan felt the blood drain from his face. He hadn't held the line. He had held a pen. He had signed a lie to save $600 a month. "He praised you," Sio said. "Said we need more technical experts who aren't afraid to document failure." She looked at him then. Her eyes were dark, flat, and unreadable. "Must feel good," she said, getting recognized. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned on the balls of her feet and walked away, silent as a ghost on the gravel. Elouan watched her go. He felt sick. The system wasn't just hiding the incident. It was broadcasting it. It was turning his shame into a standard. He had to go to the warehouse. He didn't want to, but the magnetic pull of the guilt was too strong. He needed to see Van Hala. He needed to see if the major was really parading his signature around like a trophy. Elouan walked across the lot. He entered the warehouse. The air conditioning in the office block was humming. He walked past the loading bay. Mensah drove the forklift past him. "Good morning, Private," Elouan said. Mensah stopped. He turned his head. His eyes were glazed. "Chief," Mensah said. No emotion. No recognition of the man who had left him in the rain. Just a rank and a word. "How are the boots?" Elouan asked. It was a stupid question. A cruel question. But he had to ask. Mensah looked down at his feet. "They are within regulations, Chief." "Mensah," Elouan said. "About that day." "I have work, Chief," Mensah said. He didn't wait for dismissal. He put the forklift in gear and drove away. He wasn't angry. He was erased. Elouan walked into the admin section. The outer office was crowded. 3 soldiers were waiting in chairs lined up against the wall, and in the center of the room, standing in front of Van Hala's open door, was a new face. Private Coelho. Elouan knew him by sight. though they had never spoken. Kalo was impossible to miss. He was nearly 7 feet tall, thin as a rail, with a spine that curved at the top, forcing him into a permanent stoop. A dark purple birthmark, a port wine stain, covered the entire left side of his neck, disappearing into his collar like a shadow. Kalo was holding a piece of paper. He was shaking, not the shivering of the cold rain, the fine, high-frequency vibration of terror. Van Hala was sitting at his desk, visible through the door. He was cleaning his glasses. "Come in, Mr. Basson," Van Hala called out. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He knew the footsteps. Elouan walked to the doorway. "Perfect timing," Van Hala said. "I was just explaining the concept of cumulative error to Private Kalo here." Kalo looked at Elouan. His eyes were wide, pleading. He looked like a giraffe trapped in a phone booth. "Private Kalo lost an inventory sheet," Van Hala said. "I didn't lose it, sir," Kalo stammered. "The wind. It blew out of the truck when I opened the door." "Gravity," Van Hala said softly. "Wind. Acts of God. You all have such creative partners in your incompetence." Van Hala put his glasses back on. They sat crooked. "Mr. Basson," Van Hala said, "when a soldier loses a sensitive item, what is the protocol?" "An inventory sheet isn't a sensitive item, sir," Elouan said. He tried to keep his voice steady. "It contains serial numbers," Van Hala corrected. "Information. That makes it sensitive." Van Hala opened a drawer. He pulled out a file. He opened it. Elouan saw his own signature. It was the report from 2 weeks ago. "Mr. Basson here," Van Hala said to Kalo, tapping the paper, "understands that small errors lead to catastrophic failure. He witnessed a uniform violation that others might have called minor, but he knew better. He documented it, and because of that, Private Mensa is now our most efficient worker." Van Hala looked at Elouan. His eyes were magnified by the lenses. "Tell him, Mr. Basson. Tell Private Kalo that we do not accept excuses. Tell him that accountability is an act of love." The room was silent. The 3 soldiers in the waiting chairs were watching. Corporal Sio was in the corner, filing papers, her jaw bulging rhythmically. "Chew, chew, chew." Elouan looked at Kalo. The boy was terrified. He was waiting for Elouan to save him, to say, "It's just a piece of paper, Major. Print another one." But the file was right there. The signature was right there. If Elouan spoke up now, he invalidated everything. He would be admitting that he had signed a false statement before. He would be admitting he was a liar. And the promotion board met on Thursday. Elouan felt a cramp in his left shoulder. He hiked it up. He looked Kalo in the eye. "The Major is right," Elouan said. Kalo flinched. "Details matter," Elouan continued, his voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "If you can't control a piece of paper, you can't control a weapon." Van Hala smiled. It was a thin, dry parting of lips. "Exactly," Van Hala said. He reached into his desk. He pulled out a pair of scissors. "Since you cannot manage paper, Private Kalo, perhaps you should practice." Van Hala handed the scissors to Kalo. Then he pointed to the stack of printer paper in the corner. 5 boxes, 25,000 sheets. "Cut them," Van Hala said. "Sir?" Kalo whispered. "Cut them in half," Van Hala said. "All of them, perfectly straight. If the cut is crooked, do it again, until the paper is confetti." "That will take days," Kalo said. "Then you better get started," Van Hala said. "Mr. Basson will check your work." Van Hala looked at Elouan. "Won't you, Chief?" Elouan looked at the mountain of paper. He looked at the giant stooped boy holding the tiny scissors. It was madness. It was torture disguised as training, but it was also an order, and Elouan was the precedent. "Yes, sir," Elouan said. "I'll check." Kalo walked to the corner. He sat on the floor. He opened the first box. He took a sheet of paper. Snip. The sound was small. Snip. Van Hala went back to his work. Corporal Sio kept filing. The soldiers in the chairs looked at their boots, praying they weren't next. Elouan stood there for a moment, listening to the scissors. He had become part of the machinery. He wasn't just a cog. He was the oil that made it run smooth. He turned and walked out. The heat outside was blinding. He got into his truck. He looked at his hands. They were clean. No mud. No oil. But he felt a stain on them that he knew would never wash off. He started the engine. He checked his mirrors. He drove away. And back in the office, the sound continued. Snip, 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 a rhythm of slow, deliberate destruction. The sound of the scissors had become part of the building's plumbing. Snip, snip, 3 days. Private Kylo was still in the corner of Major Van Halla's office. He sat cross-legged on the linoleum, surrounded by a drift of white paper strips that reached his waist. He looked like a man sinking into a snowbank. He didn't look up when Elouan entered. He didn't stop. His hands were wrapped in athletic tape, gray and fraying at the edges, to cover the blisters where the scissor handles rubbed against his thumb and forefinger. The pile of paper had grown, but the stack of boxes didn't seem to diminish. It was an infinity loop of useless labor. Elouan walked past him. He kept his eyes forward. If you looked at Kylo, you had to acknowledge the madness. If you didn't look, he was just office equipment. Elouan placed a folder on the outgoing tray. "Mr. Basson," Van Hala said. The major was eating an apple. He sliced it into thin, translucent wafers with a pocket knife before putting each piece into his mouth. "The quarterly archive run," Van Hala said. "It's due." He pointed the knife at a stack of banker's boxes near the door. "Take these to Central Files. Get them stamped. We need the space." Elouan looked at the boxes. They were marked Disciplinary Actions, 4,833 seconds, Q3. "I'm technically off the roster for courier duty, sir," Elouan said, "with the promotion pending." Van Hala stopped chewing. He adjusted his glasses. One lens was slightly higher than the other, catching the fluorescent light in a way that made his eye disappear into a white flare. "Leadership is service, Elouan," Van Hala said. "Don't get too big for the rank you don't have yet." "Yes, sir." Elouan picked up the boxes. They were heavy. He walked out. He passed Kylo. Snip. The sound followed him down the hall, a metronome ticking down the seconds of a wasted life. Central Files was in the basement of the headquarters building, a mile away. It was a place where careers went to be buried in cardboard coffins. The air down there was different. It was cold, dry, and smelled of dust and peppermint. Elouan pushed through the heavy steel fire doors. The room was a cavern of metal shelving units that ran from floor to ceiling, creating narrow, claustrophobic canyons of manila folders. At the front desk sat Olena. Olena was a civilian contractor who had been on the base longer than the foundations. She was a woman constructed of angles and dry skin. Her arms, exposed by a sleeveless floral blouse despite the frigid air, were covered in thick, silvery scales of severe psoriasis. She scratched them absently, a dry, rasping sound that mimicked the shuffling of paper. Her left eye was fixed on Elouan, but her right eye drifted lazily toward the ceiling, as if watching a fly that wasn't there. "Delivery," Elouan said. He set the boxes on the counter. Olena didn't move immediately. She finished typing a sentence on her computer, hunting and pecking with 2 fingers that looked like gnarled roots. "Van Halla's shop?" she asked. Her voice was like gravel in a mixer. "Yes, ma'am. Heavy quarter," she noted. "He's been busy." She pulled the top box toward her. She opened the lid. She pulled out a random file. It was the blue form, the damage report. She squinted at it, bringing the paper 2 inches from her good eye. "This one isn't finished," she said. "Excuse me?" "The disposition code," Olena said. "It's blank. Van Hala usually fills them in." She turned the paper toward Elouan. It was the report on Private Mensa. Elouan saw his own signature at the bottom. "Witness, CW2 Elouan Basson." "It's just a property damage report," Elouan said. "Docking pay, that's automatic." Olena laughed. It was a wet, rattling sound that turned into a cough. She took a hit from an inhaler on her desk, breathed out a cloud of mint, and shook her head. "You warrant officers," she said. "You know how to fix a helicopter, but you don't know how to read a form." She tapped a small box in the upper right corner of the document. "Hazard class." There was a check mark. "Property damage is Section A," Olena said. "This is a Section C filing. Look at the item code." Elouan leaned in. He had signed it without reading the codes. He had just looked at the narrative. Item, boots, combat. Contaminant, CL4. CL4, Olena read. "That's not mud, honey." Elouan felt the room tilt slightly to the left. "What is CL4? Olena looked at him with her good eye. The other one was still watching the ceiling. "Cleaner, industrial. Level 4, she said. "It's a solvent. We use it for stripping the depleted uranium coating off the tank barrels when they decommission them. It's highly corrosive, carcinogenic. If it touches skin, it eats the lipid layer in about 30 seconds. If it touches leather, it dissolves the stitching. Elouan gripped the edge of the counter. The memory of the rain rushed back. The red slush. The loading dock. It was mud, Elouan whispered. I saw it. It was just red mud. Was it? Olena asked. She scratched her arm. Rasp, rasp. Or was it runoff? She asked. Did the containment tank overflow again? It happens when it rains hard. Van Hala knows that. If the inspector saw CL4 inches the groundwater runoff, the EPA would shut down his warehouse. He'd lose his command. He'd face a court-martial. Elouan stopped breathing. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Van Hala hadn't been punishing Mensa for dirty boots. Van Hala had been terrified. Mensa had stepped in a toxic spill, a spill that proved Van Hala was negligent. If Mensa had walked into the office, he would have tracked the solvent onto the floor. Evidence. If Mensa had gone to the barracks, he would have taken off his boots and someone might have smelled the chemical. Evidence. So Van Hala made him clean it. Right there, in the rain. With his bare hands, with his own shirt. He made him use his shirt, Elouan said, his voice trembling. He made him scrub it with his hands. Olena stopped scratching. She looked at the file, then she looked at Elouan. Her expression changed. The boredom vanished, replaced by a dull, pitying horror. With his hands? She asked softly. And you signed this? She asked, confirming it was voluntary? I didn't know. You witnessed it, Olena said. That's what your signature means. It means you saw it and you approved it. She closed the file. She put it back in the box. She pushed the box away from her, as if it were radioactive. You better hope that boy has thick skin, Olena said, because CL4 doesn't stop burning just because you wash it off. It binds to the fats. It goes deep. Nerves first, then the bone. Elouan backed away from the counter. I have to go, he said. You can't go, Olena said. You just delivered the record. It's filed now. It's history. Elouan turned and ran. He didn't walk. He ran through the archives, his boots slamming against the concrete floor. He burst out into the sunlight. The heat was oppressive. He drove back to the warehouse. He drove fast. He needed to see Mensa. He needed to check his hands. He parked the truck askew, taking up 2 spaces. He ran to the loading dock. The bay doors were open. Mensa wasn't on the forklift. Elouan scanned the floor. He saw Private Kalo in the office, still cutting paper. Snip. Elouan ran to the break room. Empty. He ran to the back lot, where the waste drums were stored. And there he saw him. Mensa was standing by the fence. He was holding a pressure washer wand. He was spraying down a row of empty chemical drums. Elouan slowed down. He walked up behind the boy. Mensa, Elouan said. Mensa turned. The hose hissed as he released the trigger. Chief, Mensa said. His voice was flat, dead. Your hands, Elouan said. Show me your hands. Mensa hesitated. He looked at the nozzle of the sprayer. Show me, Elouan ordered. Mensa let go of the sprayer with his left hand. He held it out. He was wearing a heavy black rubber glove. Take it off, Elouan said. Major Van Hala says we must wear PPE at all times, Mensa said. Take it off, Private. Elouan grabbed the boy's wrist. He pulled at the cuff of the glove. Mensa flinched. A sound escaped his throat, a high, sharp whimper that sounded like a kicked dog. Elouan froze. He gently peeled the rubber glove back. It made a sucking sound as it came loose. Elouan looked at Mensa's hand. There were no fingerprints. The skin was smooth, tight, and shiny, like melted wax. The nails were yellow and brittle, pulling away from the beds. And the vitiligo, the pale patches on his wrist. They were red at the edges. It wasn't vitiligo. It was chemical burn scarring. Does it hurt? Elouan whispered. Not anymore, sir, Mensa said. The nerves are gone. Elouan stared at the ruined hand. He looked at the boy's face. Mensa wasn't looking at his hand. He was looking over Elouan's shoulder, toward the office window, toward Van Hala. He told me it was my fault, Mensa said softly. He said I was weak, that my skin was too sensitive. He said if I complained, they would discharge me for a pre-existing condition. Mensa looked at Elouan. He said, "You agreed, Chief. He said you signed the paper that said I did it to myself." Elouan felt the world collapse. It wasn't just a humiliation. It was a mutilation, and Elouan hadn't just watched. He had legalized it. He had provided the cover story that allowed Valhalla to melt a soldier's hands and call it a uniform correction. "I didn't know," Elouan said, but the words were dust. It didn't matter what he knew. It mattered what he did. Mensa pulled his hand back. He slid the glove back on. "I have to work, Chief," Mensa said. "If I stop, the drums get hot." Mensa turned back to the fence. He squeezed the trigger. Hiss. The water hit the metal. Elouan stood there. He looked at the office. Valhalla was in the window. He was watching. He raised his hand and gave a small, friendly wave. And then, he pointed to his wrist. "Time is money, Mr. Basson." Elouan felt a scream building in his chest, but his throat was squeezed shut by the iron grip of his own ambition. He couldn't scream. He had a promotion board on Thursday. The promotion board was a formality. A room with mahogany tables, 3 field-grade officers, and a pitcher of ice water that sweated onto a doily. Elouan stood at attention. His uniform was perfect. His answers were perfect. When they asked about leadership, he spoke about accountability. When they asked about integrity, he spoke about hard choices. He felt like he was vomiting glass with every word, but his face remained a mask of professional calm. They congratulated him. "A fine addition to the Warrant Officer Corps," the colonel said, shaking his hand. "We need men who understand that the mission comes first." Elouan walked out of the headquarters. He was Chief Warrant Officer 3. His pay raise was active immediately. He could call the nursing home now. He could secure the private room with the garden view for his mother. He sat in his truck in the parking lot. He pulled out his phone. He dialed the number. "Sunrise Care Facility, this is Brenda." "Hi, Brenda. This is Elouan Basson. I'd like to upgrade my mother's care plan." "Oh, Mr. Basson, that's wonderful. She'll love the new wing. We can move her Monday." "Monday is good," Elouan said. "It will be an additional $650 a month. Can you authorize that?" Elouan looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He thought of Mensa's waxen, fingerprintless fingers sliding into the black rubber glove. He thought of the red slush. "Yes," Elouan said. "I authorize it." He hung up. He drove back to the motor pool. He had done it. He had won. But the silence in the cab was deafening. When he arrived at the warehouse, something was wrong. There were no trucks at the loading dock. The bay doors were closed. A single military police cruiser was parked near the entrance, its lights flashing silently. Elouan's heart hammered against his ribs. "They found out." Olena reported it. Someone talked. He parked and walked toward the office. He saw Corporal Sayo standing outside, smoking a cigarette. She never smoked. She was shaking. "What happened?" Elouan asked. Sayo looked at him. Her eyes were red. "It's Kylo," she said. "The paper cutter? He's gone," Sayo said. "Gone where?" "Just gone. AWOL. He didn't show up for formation. They went to his barracks room." Sayo took a drag of the cigarette, inhaling deep, like she was trying to suck the smoke into her toes. "They found his roommate," she said. "Mensa?" Elouan asked. "Yeah, Mensa." Sayo looked at the closed bay doors. Mensa was sitting on his bunk. He was just staring. Staring at what? The wall. "But Kylo," Sayo's voice cracked. "Kylo left a note, and he left his uniform, folded on the bed, perfect, like he was preparing for inspection." "What did the note say?" "It didn't say anything," Sayo said. "It wasn't words." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photo. She shouldn't have it. It was evidence, but she showed it to him. It was a Polaroid of Kylo's bed. On the pillow, there was a pile of confetti, tiny, white strips of paper, thousands of them. And arranged in the center of the confetti was a pair of scissors, driven deep into the mattress, standing upright like a tombstone. "Where is he?" Elouan asked. "They found his boots by the river," Sayo said. "Just the boots, laced up, side by side." Elouan looked at the river line in the distance, a dark smudge of trees against the horizon. "And Mensa?" "MP took him in for questioning," Sayo said, "to see if he knew anything. Valhalla is in there with them now, acting as his advocate." Elouan felt the bile rise again. Valhalla wasn't advocating. Van Hala was containing. He was making sure Mensa didn't say the wrong thing about why the roommate was cutting paper for 3 days straight. "I have to go in there," Elouan said. "Don't," Co said. She grabbed his arm. Her grip was strong. "Van Hala is spinning it. He's telling the MPs that Kaelo was unstable, that we tried to help him with remedial tasks, but he just couldn't handle the pressure of service." She looked Elouan in the eye. "He's using the paper cutting as proof of his instability. He's saying, 'Who but a crazy person would sit there and cut paper for 3 days?' He ordered him to do it," Elouan shouted. "Prove it," Co hissed. "There's no written order. It was verbal, in the office. Just you, me, and Van Hala." "You heard it?" Elouan said. Co dropped her hand. She looked at her boots. "I have a kid, Elouan. I'm a single mom. I can't lose this stripe. So you're going to let him lie?" "I'm going to do what you did," Co said. Her voice was cold now. "I'm going to survive." She threw the cigarette on the ground and crushed it with her heel. "Van Hala wants to see you," she said. "He said as soon as you got back from the board." Elouan walked into the building. The air was heavy with the smell of floor wax. He walked past the empty spot where Kaelo had sat. The paper was gone, swept clean. He walked into Van Hala's office. The major was alone. The MPs were gone. Van Hala was looking at a file. "Congratulations, Chief Warrant Officer 3, Van Hala said. He didn't look up. "Where is Mensa?" Elouan asked. "Medical hold," Van Hala said. "Stress reaction. He was very attached to Private Kaelo. It's tragic, really. Some minds are just fragile." Van Hala looked up then. His glasses were straight today. "I need a statement from you, Elouan." "About what?" "About Private Kaelo's behavior. The erraticism, the obsessiveness." Van Hala slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was already typed. "Statement of witness. I, CW3, Elouan Basson, observed Private Kaelo engaging in repetitive, non-productive behaviors, specifically the destruction of office supplies, despite repeated attempts by leadership to redirect his focus." Elouan read the words. It was a masterpiece of omission. It turned torture into symptom. It turned the abuser into the therapist. "I can't sign this," Elouan said. "Of course you can," Van Hala said. "It's the truth. Did you observe him cutting paper?" "Yes." "Was it productive?" "No." "Did I try to give him a simple task to center him?" "Yes." Van Hala leaned forward. "Think about your mother, Elouan. The garden view room. It's lovely this time of year." Elouan froze. "How do you know about that?" "I'm the approving officer for your dependency paperwork update," Van Hala said. "I see everything, Elouan. I see the costs. I see the burden. You're a good son." Van Hala tapped the paper. "And a good son protects his future." Elouan looked at the pen. It was the same silver Parker jotter. If he signed, Kaelo became a tragedy of mental health. Van Hala survived. Elouan survived. If he refused, Van Hala would pull the file from the archive, the one with the CL4 damage report. He would claim Elouan misidentified the substance. He would claim Elouan was incompetent. He would crush him. And Mensa? Mensa was already broken. Saving Kaelo's reputation wouldn't bring back Mensa's hands. It wouldn't bring back Kaelo from the river. The trap was perfect. To fight the system, Elouan had to destroy himself. To save himself, he had to feed the system one more body. Elouan picked up the pen. His hand wasn't shaking. It was steady as a rock. That was the worst part. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was just cold. He signed his name, Elouan Basson. "Thank you, Chief," Van Hala said softly. "That will be all." Elouan turned to leave. "Oh, and Elouan?" Elouan stopped at the door. "Mensa is being reassigned," Van Hala said, "to the hazardous waste disposal team. Since he already has experience with the chemicals, I thought it would be a good fit." Elouan didn't turn around. He couldn't look at the monster, because if he turned around, he wouldn't see a monster. He would see a man who looked just like him. He walked out. He walked past the spot on the floor where Kaelo had sat. He imagined he could still hear it. Snip, snip. But it wasn't scissors anymore. It was the sound of his own soul being trimmed away, one small piece at a time. The collapse didn't start with a scream. It started with an apple. It was 06, 0 inches the break room. Elouan had arrived early, unable to sleep. his new rank insignia feeling heavy and sharp on his collar. He sat in the corner, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. At the center table sat Private Mensa. Mensa had an apple on his tray, a red delicious. Shiny, hard, waxy. Mensa was trying to pick it up. He reached out with his right hand. The black rubber glove was gone, replaced by white cotton compression gloves that the medics had issued to protect the healing burns. Mensa tried to grasp the fruit, but his fingers had no friction. They were smooth tubes of scar tissue inside smooth cotton. The apple slipped. It rolled a few inches. Mensa reached again. He tried to pin the apple against the table. He pressed down. The apple shot out from under his hand and rolled off the table, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. Mensa stared at his hands. He didn't move to pick it up. He just looked at his fingers, flexing them slowly. They moved stiffly, like old rope. He couldn't feel the apple. He couldn't feel the table. He had lost the sensation of touch, the most basic connection to the physical world. And now, he was being sent to handle hazardous waste. He would be moving drums of acid and solvent with hands that couldn't feel a leak until it was burning through his bone. Elouan stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Mensa didn't look up. He was used to noises he couldn't control. Elouan walked out of the break room. He walked out of the warehouse. He walked past his truck. He started walking toward the battalion headquarters. It was a mile away. He didn't care. He needed the heat. He needed the sweat to remind him he was still alive, still human, still capable of choice. He wasn't going to Valhalla. You don't ask the tumor to cure the cancer. He was going to the source. Lieutenant Colonel Gantry, the battalion commander. Gantry was a legend in the unit. He was a man of the old school, a soldier who spoke about honor and taking care of your own. He would listen. He had to. Elouan marched past the saluting guards at the HQ doors. He went straight to the adjutant. "I need to see the commander," Elouan said. "Do you have an appointment, Chief?" "No, it's an emergency. Personnel safety issue. Priority 1. The adjutant looked at Elouan's face. Elouan wasn't hiding anything anymore. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. "Sit down, Chief. I'll see if he's free." Elouan sat. He waited 5 minutes. Every minute was a physical wait. Finally, the heavy oak door opened. "Come in, Mr. Basson." Colonel Gantry sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a galleon. He was a heavy man, with eyelids that drooped low over his eyes, giving him the perpetual appearance of someone about to fall asleep. He had a tremor in his left pinky finger that tapped a constant, silent rhythm against the wood of his desk. The room smelled strongly of peppermint tea and old, cracked leather. "Sir," Elouan said, standing at attention. "At ease, Elouan," Gantry said. His voice was a deep rumble. "Congratulations on the promotion. Major Valhalla speaks highly of you." "That's why I'm here, sir," Elouan said. "Major Valhalla." Gantry's pinky finger stopped tapping. He took a sip of tea from a delicate china cup that looked absurd in his massive hand. "Go on, Private Mensa," Elouan said. The injury wasn't negligence. It was forced. Major Valhalla made him scrub his boots with his bare hands in a CL4 spill. Gantry didn't blink. "And Private Kylo," Elouan continued, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "He wasn't unstable. He was tortured. Valhalla made him cut paper for 3 days. It broke him. He didn't jump in the river because he was sick. He jumped because he was trapped." Elouan took a breath. "And I signed the papers, sir. I signed them because I was afraid. I lied on official records. I covered it up." Elouan stopped. He was shaking, but he felt lighter. The truth was out. It was in the air, hanging between them. Gantry set the teacup down. He looked at Elouan with those heavy, sleepy eyes. "That is a very serious accusation, Chief," Gantry said. "It's the truth, sir. You can check the medical records. You can check the chemical runoff logs." "I don't need to check the logs," Gantry said. He opened a drawer. He pulled out a file. It wasn't a personnel file. It was a command climate survey. "I know Valhalla runs a tight ship," Gantry said. "His inventory counts are 100%. His loss rate is 0. His budget is the only one in the brigade that isn't in the red. He's melting soldiers' hands, sir." Gantry sighed. He looked tired. "Mr. Basson," Gantry said, "do you know what happens when we lose a supply officer? We get an audit. Gantry said. A full logistical audit. Everything freezes. Trucks stop moving. Parts stop arriving. Training halts. The brigade fails its readiness metrics. Funding gets cut. Gantry leaned forward. The leather of his chair groaned. And do you know what happens to a warrant officer who admits to falsifying legal documents? Elouan went cold. I am prepared to face the consequences, sir. If it stops him. Stop him? Gantry asked. Stop him from what? Managing his resources? Gantry pressed a button on his desk phone. Send him in. The side door opened. Elouan turned. Major Van Hala walked in. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. He was holding a tablet. He walked over to Gantry's desk and placed the tablet down. The transfer orders are ready, Colonel, Van Hala said, for Private Mensa. Thank you, Major, Gantry said. Elouan looked between them. There was no shock. There was no investigation. This was a meeting. You knew? Elouan whispered. We communicate, Van Hala said softly. The Colonel and I discuss all personnel issues. Gantry looked at Elouan. Major Van Hala told me you were having trouble adjusting to the new rank, Gantry said. He said you were feeling guilty about the hard choices. He mutilated a boy, Elouan shouted. The room went silent. Gantry's pinky finger started tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. Basson, Gantry said. You have two choices right now, and only two. Gantry held up two fingers. They were thick, calloused sausages. Choice one, Gantry said. We accept your confession. We charge you with making false official statements, dereliction of duty, and conspiracy. You go to court-martial. You lose your rank. You lose your pension. Your mother loses her care facility next week. Elouan felt the air leave his lungs. And Van Hala? Elouan asked. Major Van Hala will be reprimanded for unclear guidance, Gantry said. He will keep his command. Because I need him. I don't need you. Elouan stared at the floor. The carpet was a rich, deep blue. Choice two, Gantry said. He slid the tablet across the desk toward Elouan. You prove that you are stable. You prove that you can handle the burden of leadership. Elouan looked at the screen. It was the transfer order for Private Mensa. 2. Hazardous Material Disposal Unit. From Supply Battalion. Approving authority. The line was blank. Van Hala can't sign it, Gantry said. Conflict of interest, given the history. It needs a warrant officer's signature. A technical expert who certifies the soldier is fit for duty. Elouan looked at Van Hala. Van Hala was cleaning his glasses. He looked bored. If I sign this, Elouan said, I'm sending him to die. The chemicals, his hands. He will wear gloves, Van Hala said. He will be fine, or he won't. And if he isn't, we will process him out then. But the cargo needs to move. Elouan, sign it, Gantry ordered. And we forget this conversation happened. Your mother stays in her room, you keep your rank, you go back to work. Elouan looked at his hand. It was the hand that had held the clipboard in the rain. It was the hand that had signed the damage report. It was the hand that had signed Kylo's character assassination. He realized then that he wasn't fighting the system. He was the system. He was the mechanism by which the machine protected itself. If he refused, he died, and Mensa still suffered. If he submitted, he lived, and Mensa suffered. The outcome for the victim was identical. The only variable was Elouan's own survival. He reached for the stylus. His hand was heavy. It felt like it was made of lead. He looked at Gantry. Gantry wasn't looking at him. He was looking at his tea. He looked at Van Hala. Van Hala was looking at the clock. Elouan touched the stylus to the glass. He signed. CW3 Elouan Basson. He hit submit. The screen flashed green. Process complete. Good, Gantry said. Now get out of my office. Elouan turned. He walked out. He walked past Van Hala. Van Hala didn't say a word. He just patted Elouan on the shoulder. A light, friendly tap. Good boy. Elouan walked out of the headquarters. The sun was high now. Blinding. He walked back to the warehouse. He went to the loading dock. Mensa was standing there with his duffel bag. A truck was waiting. It was a flatbed, loaded with yellow drums marked corrosive. The driver was waiting. You ready, kid? The driver asked. Mensa looked at Elouan. Chief? Mensa asked. Did you stop it? Elouan stood there. He looked at the boy's cotton-gloved hands. He looked at the hope in the boy's eyes. a hope that Elouan had just electronically deleted. "No," Elouan said. "But you went to the colonel," Mensa said. "I saw you walk there." "I went," Elouan said. Elouan looked at the yellow drums. He looked at the red mud staining the tires of the truck. "Get in the truck, Private," Elouan said. "That's an order." Mensa's face crumbled, not into tears, into nothing. The light went out behind his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Yes, Chief." Mensa picked up his bag. He struggled with the handle. His smooth fingers couldn't grip it. He had to hook his arm through the strap. He climbed into the cab. The door slammed shut. The truck pulled away. Elouan watched it go. He watched until it turned the corner and disappeared. He was alone on the dock. He was safe. His mother was safe. His career was safe. And all it had cost was his soul. He turned to go back inside. Major Van Hala was standing in the doorway. He was holding a fresh apple. "Hungry?" Van Hala asked. He tossed the apple to Elouan. Elouan caught it. It was red, shiny, perfect. "See?" Van Hala said, smiling. "Good grip." Elouan looked at the apple. He didn't throw it back. He didn't smash it. He polished it on his uniform. And he took a bite. 6 months later, the Georgia winter arrived. It didn't bring snow. It brought a gray, iron-hard frost that coated the chain-link fences and turned the red clay into frozen brick. Elouan Bassin stood on the loading dock. He was wearing a new jacket, Gore-Tex, fleece-lined. It was warm. He held a clipboard in his left hand. His shoulder didn't hike up anymore. He had learned to control the tick. Or maybe he just didn't feel the phantom impact anymore because the part of him that used to flinch was dead. "Manifest checks out," Elouan said. His voice was quiet. It sounded like shuffling paper. Standing in front of him was a new soldier, Private Oren. Oren was short, with a face ravaged by deep, cystic acne that turned his cheeks a violent purple in the cold. He had a nervous habit of squinting his left eye, as if he were trying to aim a rifle that wasn't there. "Thank you, Chief," Oren said. Oren looked at Elouan with pure terror. Not respect, terror, because Elouan Bassin had a reputation now. They called him the Ghost, because he never yelled. He never raised his voice. He just observed. And if you failed him, you disappeared. Just like Mensa, just like Kalo. "One more thing, Private," Elouan said. Oren froze. "Your gloves," Elouan said. Oren looked at his hands. He was wearing standard-issue black leather shells with wool inserts. "They are frayed at the seam," Elouan said. "The index finger." "It happened this morning, Chief," Oren stammered, catching a crate. "A breach in the uniform is a breach in discipline," Elouan said. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a lighter. "Burn the threads," Elouan said. "Seal the nylon. Do it now." Oren took the lighter. His hands were shaking. He tried to burn the fraying thread while wearing the glove. The flame licked close to the leather, close to the skin. Elouan watched. He didn't blink. He didn't stop him. He felt a vague sense of satisfaction, not pleasure, just the satisfaction of a machine verifying that a part was within tolerance. The door to the office opened. Major Van Hala stepped out. He was wearing a scarf. Cashmere. "Excellent work, Mr. Bassin," Van Hala said. He didn't look at Oren. Oren didn't exist to him. "The quarterly safety award came in," Van Hala said. "The general signed it. 0 preventable accidents." Van Hala smiled. "We're going to put it in the trophy case. By the front door." "I'll take care of it, sir," Elouan said. "Oh, and Elouan, your mother sent a card," Van Hala said. "To the office, thanking the command for the flowers we sent on her birthday." "That was kind of you, sir." "She said she loves the garden view," Van Hala said. "She said she finally feels safe." Elouan nodded. "She is safe," Elouan said. "Because of you," Van Hala said. He patted Elouan on the arm. "Come inside. It's cold out here." Van Hala went back into the warmth. Elouan stayed for a moment. He looked out at the yard. He looked at the spot where Mensa had scrubbed his boots. The concrete was clean. He looked at the fence where Mensa had sprayed the drums. The fence was clean. He looked at the river line where Kylo's boots had been found. The river flowed on, indifferent and brown. Elouan looked at Private Oren. The boy had managed to seal the thread. He handed the lighter back. "Thank you, Chief," Oren whispered. "Get back to work," Elouan said. Elouan turned and walked toward the office. He caught his reflection in the glass of the door. For a second, he didn't recognize the man staring back. The face was smoother. The eyes were colder. The glasses he wore now, reading glasses, for the paperwork sat slightly crooked on his nose. He looked like Van Halla. He opened the door. The smell of lemon pledge and stale coffee hit him. It smelled like home. He walked to his desk. He sat down. He picked up a pen. A silver Parker jotter. Click. He began to sign the day's reports. The title of the video had promised a shock. A black soldier was humiliated in uniform. What happened next shocked the entire base. But as Elouan signed his name over and over again, he realized the truth. There was no riot. There was no investigation. There was no justice. The shock wasn't that the system failed. The shock was how quickly, how quietly, and how completely everyone on the base decided that it hadn't. The shock was the silence. And in that silence, Elouan Basson kept writing, safe, successful, and hollowed out, while the machine hummed its perfect, terrible rhythm. Snip, snip, click. Elouan Basson never looked at the rain again. He didn't have to. He was dry. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it.